Hi, today I will be talking to you about Esperanza Rising by Pam Muniz Ryan. This novel is an appropriate reading level for 6th through 8th graders. Esperanza Rising is set in 1930s Mexico and California during the Great Depression. Esperanza Ortega is a young Mexican girl around 13 years old. At the beginning of the novel, she lives on El Rancho de las Rosas, which is her family's farm. In Mexico, Esperanza is very wealthy and has all that she could ever want, but misfortune falls on her family when her father is killed in mysterious and suspicious circumstances. Because of a loophole in her father's will, her two uncles take control of the farm and threaten to kick Esperanza and her mother out unless her mother agrees to marry one of the uncles. Mama resists, but when a fire burns down their house, and it's probably started by one of the two uncles, they decide that they can no longer stay in Mexico or resist the advances of the uncle. So Esperanza and her mother flee with some of the employees of their farm to California to work on a Mexican immigrant farm labor camp. While there, Esperanza is forced to step up and do her part to take care of the family. She deals with leaving her life in Mexico behind, life as an immigrant, newfound poverty, and growing into a new role in her family. There are four main characters that are important to know about as you read this novel and plan to teach it. The first one is Esperanza herself, who is a 13-year-old girl. And as I said in the plot, she moves to California with her mother, looking for work and looking to make more money. The second main character or important character of the novel is Miguel. Miguel is an employee of Esperanza's family. He's a couple years older than Esperanza, but his family works for her father, so they kind of grow up together. And throughout the novel, he's a little bit of a love interest for Esperanza, but mainly just a good friend for her to lean on. The third character is Mama, who is Esperanza's mother. She serves as sort of the rock for Esperanza, but after the move to California, her mother Mama gets sick, and that puts Esperanza in a situation where she needs to step up to take care of herself as well as her mother. The fourth main character is Abuelita, which is Esperanza's grandmother and Mama's mother. Abuelita is left behind in Mexico when Esperanza and her mother flee to California. Much of the novel is spent talking about or making plans to be able to get Abuelita to America with Esperanza and her mother, and that's one of the big hurdles that Esperanza faces throughout the novel, and trying to figure out how to make that work, how to get the money to do that so that she can bring her family back together. I came up with three big ideas as well as three essential questions for this novel. The first big idea that I came up with was the meaning of family. Family is a big theme throughout the whole novel. What family looks like, what the roles of different members of a family are, and even just what it means to be a family. Esperanza, when she moves to California with her mother and leaves her grandmother behind, she is living in a house with people who, though they aren't her blood relatives, sort of become a makeshift family. The second big idea I came up with is dealing with tragedy. Esperanza faces many tragedies throughout the novel. One right off the bat is the death of her father, and she has to learn how to come to terms with that and how to live on despite that. The third one I came up with is freedom and the American dream. One of the big pulls for Esperanza and her family and her employees of her family to move to America is the hope for making something more out of themselves. And Esperanza really struggles with understanding that American dream or that freedom that everybody looks for in America. She questions if it's really worth it or if the American dream is even possible when everyone around her is striving to get it and striving to make something more of themselves. So for the three essential questions, the first one is, what does it mean to be rich or successful? Esperanza's family in Mexico is incredibly wealthy, enough to run a huge farm and even have many servants work for them. But when when she loses all of her wealth and then is forced to move to California with her mother to try and make more money. She has to try to figure out how to be happy despite not being materially rich, and how to have hope despite not having all the materials and all the comforts that she's used to. So the second essential question is kind of related to that, in that it's, what does it mean to have hope? Esperanza is actually the Spanish word for hope. So hope is a huge theme throughout the whole novel. Esperanza is constantly trying to figure out why she's in these circumstances and why she's continuing to strive to get out of them, and why it's even worth it for her to keep working as hard as she is. So she struggles with just trying to find hope and finding hope to hold on to. The third question I came up with is, do circumstances affect if something is right or wrong? So one of the other kind of big themes of the novel is immigration and life as an immigrant in America. There are several circumstances throughout the novel where Esperanza has to make a decision about what she's going to do and if something is right or wrong. And her mind changes a couple times on whether or not she thinks something is wrong or right. So I came up with that question because Esperanza often has to look at the circumstances around her and tries to look at the bigger picture when trying to decide whether or not she should do something. For this novel, I came up with 3 creative learning activities. The first one is an interview activity. So the students would write out a hypothetical interview questions for either Miguel or Esperanza. You could use other characters from the book, but I feel that these 2 would be the easiest to do because they're 2 that we meet the most in the novel. So they would come up with hypothetical interview questions surrounding the circumstances that that character faces. They could ask the motivation behind some of their actions, and then they could switch with another student, and that student, having read the novel and having an understanding of those characters, would try to answer the interview questions from the perspective of that character. You could even add a presentation element to this and have the students pair up and script out together an interview and then perform it for the rest of the class. Second activity is a newspaper article activity. So the students would write a mock newspaper article on a researchable topic from the book. Some examples would be the strikes in the labor camp, deportation during the 1930s, and just the broader idea of the Great Depression and immigration during the Great Depression. It wouldn't necessarily have to be a research project. You could do that, or you could just have the students write a newspaper article based upon information that they have from the book, or it could be a more creative writing exercise where they take something going on in the book and write a newspaper article about that. Like the strikes in the labor camp going on would be a good example of that. The third activity I called a perspective switch. So this is where the students would pick one scene from the novel, or maybe 2 scenes, and write it from the perspective of another character in the scene. So instead of writing from the perspective of Esperanza, which is how the book is written, they would pick a different character and then find a scene or a chapter in the novel in which that character is prominent, and then write that scene from the perspective of that character. You could even do something where maybe not choose a specific scene, but when a character is talked about as being absent, you can have the students write a little bit about what they think maybe that character was doing while the character was separate from the plot. So a good example for that would either be Miguel or Abuelita, because there are sections in the novel where neither of them are really active in it, but they're talked about while they're gone. There are several different things you could do with intertextuality for this novel, but I came up with mainly 2 different things that you could do. The first one is a YouTube video called The Hidden Life of an Undocumented U.S. Immigrant. So this is a YouTube interview kind of documentary about a woman who is an undocumented immigrant from Mexico living in the United States and the challenges she faces and also the challenge she's about to face as she's probably going to be getting deported. So the reason why I picked this was because a huge theme in Esperanza Rising is about immigration, and there are several instances where minor characters are being deported, and Esperanza kind of gives her perspective and her viewpoint on what it means to separate families and kind of the cost of that. So I think it would be interesting to take something that's more modern and from recent events, because immigration is always in the news. So this is a good chance to give the students more informed on things going on right now, and then they would be able to compare it to the experience of Esperanza in Esperanza Rising. Alternatively, if you don't want to do a video interview, you could also find a current news article dealing with immigration, or even a written out interview of an immigrant from the last 5 or 6 years or so, and then have the students compare that to Esperanza Rising and compare the experience of Esperanza to whoever that immigrant is. The second idea I came up with for intertextuality is another novel that's for young adults, and it's called Enrique's Journey, The True Story of a Boy Determined to Reunite with His Mother by Sonia Nazario. So this book deals with a young man from Honduras whose mother had left him when he was little, and she moved to the United States for work. And then when he gets a little bit older, he decides that he needs to come to the United States and look for his mother. It has a lot of similar themes to Esperanza Rising, like family and family roles, life as an immigrant in the United States, dealing with poverty. So it's also a more modern story. So I think it would be really interesting to have the two novels and then compare the experiences of Esperanza to Enrique, even though they're both immigrants to the United States and have a lot of similar experiences. They're from different time periods. So you could compare the differences and similarities between the two characters in a really interesting way. Thank you so much for listening to my book talk on Esperanza Rising by Pam Muniz Ryan. I really enjoyed reading this book. I think it could create some interesting opportunities to get your students thinking about ideas like immigration and family and poverty and what it's like to strive for the American dream. I gave you some of the ideas that I would use to teach this novel, but there are so many more things that could be done with it. I hope that you decide to, or at least consider to use this novel in your classroom. But either way, thank you for your time and good luck.